The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers and clattered against the concrete garage floor, echoing in the November night like a gunshot. From inside the house, I could hear my wife Sarah's voice rising to that particular pitch that meant trouble was brewing. "Mom, I don't care what you think about Danny. He's boring. He's going nowhere. And frankly, I'm tired of pretending otherwise." My name is Danny Morrison, and I've been fixing things my whole life. Cars, plumbing, broken appliances, you name it, I can probably jury-rig it back to working order. What I apparently couldn't fix was my marriage, though God knows I'd been trying for the better part of 15 years. I wiped my hands on an old shop rag and moved closer to the kitchen window. Sarah was pacing back and forth, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around a glass of wine that was definitely not her first of the evening. Our daughter Emma sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone with the practiced indifference of a 20-year-old college student. "I mean, look at this place," Sarah continued, gesturing wildly with her free hand. "Same ratty furniture we bought when we got married. Same peeling paint. Same broken-down husband who thinks changing the oil in that piece of junk truck is a legitimate hobby." Emma looked up from her phone just long enough to roll her eyes. "Maybe if you actually talked to Dad instead of complaining about him to everyone else, things might be different. Don't lecture me about marriage, young lady. You have no idea what it's like to be stuck with someone who has zero ambition, zero drive. Your father could have been something if he'd just applied himself, but instead, he's content to stay in that grimy auto shop forever, bringing home grease stains and a paycheck that barely covers the mortgage." I felt my jaw clench. Barely covers the mortgage? I'd been busting my ass for 25 years, working my way up from oil changes to running the service department at Henderson's Auto. We weren't rich, but we weren't exactly eating beans and rice either. "At least Dad doesn't spend half his paycheck on designer purses and wine," Emma shot back. Sarah's face flushed red. "Those are investments in my career. Image matters in advertising, Emma. Something your father never understood. When you're trying to climb the corporate ladder, you can't show up looking like you shop at Walmart." That stung. Not because it wasn't true. I did shop at Walmart, and I wasn't ashamed of it, but because of the venom in her voice. When had I become such a disappointment to the woman I'd married? When had my steady job and reliable nature turned from assets into embarrassments? I was about to head back to the truck when Sarah's phone buzzed on the counter. The sound made her freeze mid-pace, and she practically lunged for it. Even from outside, I could see the smile that spread across her face as she read whatever message had just come through. "Who's that?" Emma asked, not looking up from her own screen. "Just work stuff," Sarah said quickly, but her voice had changed. Gone was the bitter edge from moments before, replaced by something softer, warmer. "I need to take this call. It's about the Peterson account." She disappeared into the living room, phone pressed to her ear, and I heard the front door open and close. Through the garage window, I watched her walk to the end of our driveway, far enough from the house that her conversation wouldn't be overheard. Something cold settled in my stomach. In 15 years of marriage, Sarah had never taken a work call outside. Hell, she usually put her calls on speaker and complained loudly about her clients while she made dinner. I found myself moving through the garage, past my workbench and tool chest, until I was standing at the side gate that led to our front yard. Sarah was about 50 feet away, her back to me, but the November night was still, and her voice carried. "I miss you too," she was saying, her tone completely different from the harsh words she'd been throwing around about me just minutes earlier. "I know, baby. I know." This is so much harder than I thought it would be. Baby? Sarah hadn't called me baby in at least 5 years. "Danny's working late again tomorrow night, so I can probably get away for a few hours. Maybe we could go to that little place you mentioned? The one with the private booths?" My blood turned to ice water in my veins. I gripped the gate so hard my knuckles went white, straining to hear every word. "I can't wait much longer, Eric. I'm dying here, pretending everything's fine. Pretending I'm happy with this boring, dead-end life. Emma's going back to school next week, and then we can start making real plans. Eric. I knew that name. Eric Castellanos worked at Sarah's advertising agency. I'd met him at the company Christmas party last year. Tall, tan, expensive suit. The kind of guy who probably had his teeth professionally whitened and drove a BMW. I love you too, Sarah whispered into the phone. More than you know. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled backward, my shoulder slamming into the garage wall hard enough to rattle the tools hanging there. The metallic clatter seemed impossibly loud in the quiet night, and I held my breath, waiting to see if Sarah had heard. But she was too wrapped up in her conversation, too lost in whatever fantasy she was spinning with her lover, to notice her husband's world falling apart 50 feet away. I made it back to my truck on unsteady legs and sat down hard on the creeper I'd been using to slide under the chassis. My hands were shaking as I reached for my beer, but the bottle was empty. Just as well, I had a feeling I was going to need all my wits about me for whatever came next. 15 years of marriage, of building a life together, of thinking we were a team even when things got tough. Sure, we'd had our problems. Sarah's job stress, my long hours at the shop, the usual stuff that every couple deals with. But I'd never imagined she was so unhappy that she'd started looking elsewhere for comfort. The worst part wasn't even the cheating, though that felt like a knife between my ribs. It was the contempt in her voice when she talked about our life together, our boring, dead-end life, as if everything we'd built meant nothing to her. I heard the front door open and close again, followed by Sarah's heels clicking across the kitchen floor. Through the window, I watched her pour another glass of wine and settle onto the couch next to Emma, who was still glued to her phone. "Everything okay with work?" Emma asked absently. "Fine, honey. Just the usual client drama. You know how it is. I knew how it was, all right. I was starting to understand exactly how it was." The next morning, I woke up before my alarm and lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Sarah slept beside me. She looked peaceful, almost innocent, with her blonde hair spread across the pillow and her face relaxed in sleep. If I hadn't heard that phone call, I might have reached over and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, might have kissed her forehead and told her I loved her before heading off to work. Instead, I slipped out of bed as quietly as possible and headed for the shower. The hot water felt good against my shoulders, which were sore from hunching over the truck's engine the night before, but it couldn't wash away the sick feeling in my stomach. By the time I came downstairs, Sarah was already in the kitchen, dressed in one of her sharp business suits, and scrolling through her phone while she waited for the coffee to finish brewing. "Morning," I said, keeping my voice neutral. She looked up and smiled, the same smile she'd been giving me for years. How had I never noticed how forced it looked? "Morning, babe. You were up late last night. Truck giving you trouble again?" "Just routine maintenance," I replied, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "Nothing I can't handle. Maybe it's time to think about getting something newer, more reliable." I saw a nice Honda at the dealership on 5th Street yesterday. Very practical. Practical. There was that word again. Everything in Sarah's world had to be practical, efficient, image-conscious. God forbid I should actually enjoy working on my truck or take pride in keeping a 20-year-old vehicle running like new. "I like my truck," I said simply. Sarah shrugged, already losing interest in the conversation. "Suit yourself. I'll probably be late tonight. We're presenting the Peterson campaign to the client, and you know how these things go." "Right. The Peterson account." I watched her face carefully as I said it, looking for any sign of guilt or nervousness. Nothing. She was either a better liar than I'd given her credit for, or she'd been practicing this deception for longer than I wanted to think about. "Emma's driving back to school this afternoon," Sarah continued, gathering up her purse and car keys. "So it'll just be you and me for dinner. Maybe we could order Chinese? Watch a movie?" The casual way she suggested it made my skin crawl. Was this how it was going to be? Her sneaking around with Eric while pretending everything was normal at home? playing the loving wife when it was convenient, then bad-mouthing me to our daughter when she thought I couldn't hear. Sure, I managed. Chinese sounds good. She kissed my cheek on her way out, a quick, perfunctory peck that felt like a lie against my skin. Have a good day, babe. Love you. The words hung in the air long after she'd gone, mocking me with their emptiness. Work was a blessing that day. Nothing like the methodical process of diagnosing engine problems to keep your mind off your personal troubles. I spent the morning rebuilding a transmission for Mrs. Patterson's ancient Buick, losing myself in the familiar rhythm of disassembly and repair. But even the most absorbing work couldn't keep my thoughts from drifting back to Sarah's phone call. The way her voice had changed when she talked to Eric. The casual cruelty with which she dismissed our entire life together. Around lunchtime, my phone buzzed with a text message. For a split second, my heart jumped, thinking it might be Sarah. Maybe she was feeling guilty about something. Maybe she wanted to talk. Instead, it was from my buddy Jules Martinez, who owned a small boxing gym downtown where I'd been working out for the past few years. You coming in today? Got a new heavy bag that needs breaking in. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, yeah. Definitely need to hit something today. Jules had been a cop for 15 years before opening the gym, and he had the kind of street-smart wisdom that came from dealing with people at their worst. If anyone could help me figure out what to do next, it would be him. I finished up Mrs. Patterson's transmission and told my boss, Mr. Henderson, that I was taking a long lunch. The gym was only 10 minutes away, tucked between a pawn shop and a used bookstore in one of the city's older neighborhoods. The familiar smell of sweat and leather hit me as soon as I walked through the door. Jules was behind the front counter, updating membership files on an ancient computer that looked like it belonged in a museum. "Danny boy," he called out, looking up with a grin. "You look like hell. What's eating you?" Jules had always been direct. It was one of the things I liked about him. No small talk, no dancing around the issue, just straight to the point. I glanced around the gym, making sure we were alone, then leaned against the counter. "Can I ask you something?" Hypothetically. His expression grew more serious. "Shoot. If you suspected your wife was cheating on you, what would you do? I mean, legally speaking. What are your options?" Jules set down his pen and studied my face. "This hypothetical, or are we talking about Sarah?" I didn't answer directly, but my expression must have told him everything he needed to know. "Shit, Danny. I'm sorry." He came around the counter and put a hand on my shoulder. "What makes you think she's stepping out?" I told him about the phone call, about the way Sarah had been acting lately, about the growing distance between us that I'd been trying to ignore for months. Jules listened without interrupting, his cop instincts kicking in. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "First thing you need to understand," he finally said, "is that suspicion isn't proof. You heard one side of a phone conversation. Could be innocent." She said she loved him, Jules. Called him baby. That's not innocent. "No," he agreed. "It's not. But if you're thinking about divorce, you're going to need more than your word against hers. Especially if she's got a good job and you're looking at alimony, property division, all that fun stuff." The thought of divorce made my stomach clench, but I forced myself to consider it logically. Sarah made more money than I did, but not by a huge margin. We'd bought the house together, both our names on the mortgage. Emma was over 18, so custody wouldn't be an issue. "What kind of proof are we talking about?" I asked. Jules glanced around the empty gym, then leaned closer. Photos, emails, text messages, credit card receipts for hotels or restaurants, bank records showing money spent on gifts, phone records showing calls and messages to the same number. The more documentation you have, the stronger your position. That sounds like stalking. It's not stalking if it's your own wife and your own money she's spending. Look, Danny, I'm not telling you to hire a private investigator or start following her around, but if she's using joint accounts to finance this affair, You have every right to know where that money's going. He had a point. Sarah and I shared a checking account, credit cards, everything. If she was taking Eric to expensive restaurants or buying him gifts, I was technically paying for it. There's something else you should consider, Jules continued. If you're right about this, and if you decide you want out of the marriage, the way you handle the next few weeks could determine whether you come out of this thing with your shirt or not. What do you mean? I mean, don't do anything stupid. Don't confront her until you have solid proof. Don't start a fight that makes you look like the bad guy. And whatever you do, don't give her any reason to claim you were abusive or threatening. That's the kind of thing that can really screw you in a divorce settlement. I nodded, understanding the wisdom in his words, even as part of me wanted to drive straight to Sarah's office and have it out with her right there in front of her coworkers. One more thing, Jules said, his voice gentler now. Make sure this is really what you want to do. Marriage counseling, talking it out, trying to work things through, those are options too. Divorce is permanent, Danny. Once you go down that road, there's no coming back. I spent the next hour taking out my frustration on Jules's new heavy bag, throwing punches until my knuckles were raw and my shirt was soaked with sweat. But even the physical exhaustion couldn't quiet the questions spinning through my mind. Did I want to save my marriage, or was I already past that point? Could I ever trust Sarah again, even if she ended things with Eric? And what about Emma? How would this affect her? By the time I got back to the shop, I'd made a decision. I wasn't ready to give up on my marriage, but I wasn't going to be a fool about it either. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with before I decided how to proceed. That evening, Sarah came home around 8:30, claiming the client presentation had run long and the team had gone out for drinks afterward to celebrate. She seemed relaxed, almost cheerful, as she kicked off her heels and poured herself a glass of wine. "How was your day?" she asked, settling onto the couch beside me. "Same as always," I replied, muting the television. "How did the presentation go?" "Really well, actually. The client loved our concepts, especially the digital campaign Eric put together. He's so creative, you know, always thinking outside the box. The casual way she said his name, the admiration in her voice, it was like a slap in the face. But I kept my expression neutral, just nodded and made appropriate noises of interest. "That's great, honey. I'm proud of you." She smiled and curled up against my side, her head on my shoulder. For just a moment, it felt like old times, like we were still the team we'd once been. "I love you, Danny," she said softly. I know I don't say it enough, but I do. The words should have been comforting. Instead, they felt like another lie, another layer of deception in what was becoming an increasingly complex web of betrayal. "I love you too," I replied, because what else could I say? But as I held my wife in my arms, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume, I was already planning my next move. The next few days fell into a routine that felt surreal in its normalcy. Sarah went to work, I went to the shop, we ate dinner together and made small talk about our days. To anyone looking from the outside, we probably seemed like a perfectly ordinary married couple. But I was watching now, really watching, and once you start looking for the signs of deception, they're everywhere. The way Sarah's phone was always face down on the table, how she'd started taking it with her to the bathroom, claiming she was checking work emails. The new lingerie that appeared in her dresser drawer, black lace and silk that she certainly hadn't worn for me. The subtle changes in her appearance, a new haircut, more expensive makeup, clothes that showed off her figure in ways she hadn't bothered with in years. On Thursday, I made an excuse to leave work early and drove to Sarah's office building. I didn't have a plan, exactly. I just wanted to see for myself what was going on. The Brennan and Associates building was one of those modern glass towers that tried too hard to look impressive. I parked across the street and settled in to wait, feeling ridiculous, but determined to follow through. At exactly 6 o'clock, Sarah emerged from the lobby. She wasn't alone. Eric Castellanos walked beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed with each step, He was even better looking than I'd remembered from the Christmas party. Tall and lean with perfectly styled dark hair and the kind of confident smile that probably made clients sign contracts without reading the fine print. They stopped beside a silver BMW, Eric's I assumed, and talked for several minutes. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language spoke volumes. The way Sarah leaned toward him when she laughed. How his hand lingered on her arm when he opened the car door for her. The kiss they shared before she got into her own car was brief, but unmistakably intimate. I followed at a distance as they drove to Romano's, an upscale Italian restaurant downtown. The kind of place Sarah and I used to go for anniversaries, back when we still celebrated them properly. Through the restaurant's front window, I watched them being seated at a corner table. Sarah was animated, gesturing with her hands as she talked, her face bright with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen in months. Eric leaned forward, hanging on her every word, occasionally reaching across the table to touch her fingers. They looked happy. That was the part that hurt most. Not just attracted to each other, not just caught up in the excitement of a forbidden affair, but genuinely happy in each other's company. When had Sarah stopped looking at me like that? When had I stopped being the person who could make her laugh until her eyes sparkled? I drove home in a daze, my mind churning with everything I'd witnessed. Sarah's car was already in the driveway when I arrived, and I found her in the kitchen, humming as she loaded the dishwasher. "There you are," she said, smiling over her shoulder. I was starting to worry. "Long day at the shop?" "Yeah," I managed. "Had to stay late to finish Mrs. Patterson's Buick." "Well, you're just in time." I picked up Thai food on my way home. Your favorite, pad Thai with extra peanuts. She'd picked up Thai food all right. After a romantic dinner with her lover. The casual lie came so easily to her that I wondered how many others I'd swallowed over the past few months. "Thanks," I said, accepting the takeout container she handed me. That was thoughtful. We ate in comfortable silence, Sarah scrolling through her phone between bites. I found myself studying her face, looking for some sign of guilt or internal conflict. But she seemed perfectly at ease, as if deceiving her husband was just another item on her daily to-do list. After dinner, I excused myself to take a shower, but instead I went to our bedroom and carefully searched through Sarah's things. I felt like a criminal going through her dresser drawers and jewelry box, but Jules was right. I needed proof. I found it in her purse, tucked inside a zippered compartment I'd never noticed before. A receipt from Romano's for 2 dinners and a bottle of wine, dated that very evening. The total was over $200, charged to our joint credit card. My hands shook as I photographed the receipt with my phone. $200 of my money, spent on a romantic dinner with her lover while she lied to my face about working late. But that wasn't all. Buried deeper in the same compartment was a small jewelry box containing a pair of diamond earrings I'd never seen before. They were beautiful, delicate drops that probably cost more than I made in a week. The kind of gift a man gives a woman when he's serious about her. I photographed those too, then carefully put everything back exactly as I'd found it. Over the next week, I became a detective in my own life. I started checking our credit card statements online, looking for charges I couldn't account for. I found plenty. Expensive lunches at restaurants I'd never heard of, purchases from Victoria's Secret and high-end department stores, even a charge for a weekend at a bed and breakfast 2 hours out of town. The weekend charge was dated 3 weeks ago, when Sarah had told me she was going to a work conference in Chicago. I'd even driven her to the airport, kissed her goodbye, told her to have a safe trip. She'd probably driven straight to Eric's place after I left. The betrayal ran deeper than I'd imagined. This wasn't some recent development, some moment of weakness that had spiraled out of control. Sarah had been planning and executing this deception for months, maybe longer. But the real gut punch came when I found the emails. Sarah had left her laptop open on the kitchen table while she took a shower, and I couldn't resist the opportunity to do some digging. Her email account was still logged in, and it didn't take long to find what I was looking for. The messages between Sarah and Eric went back 6 months. 6 months of increasingly intimate exchanges, of planning secret meetings and romantic getaways. 6 months of my wife pouring out her heart to another man while treating me like a roommate she barely tolerated. But it wasn't just the affair that made my blood boil. It was the way they talked about me. "Danny's working Saturday, so we'll have the whole afternoon," read one message from Sarah. "I swear, sometimes I think he cares more about those stupid cars than he does about me." Eric's response was even worse. "You deserve so much better than that, baby. A woman like you shouldn't be stuck with some grease monkey who has no ambition. When we're finally together, I'm going to treat you like the queen you are." Grease monkey. The casual contempt in those 2 words hit me harder than any physical blow could have. There were dozens of messages like that, each one a fresh knife in my back. Sarah complaining about our sex life, our social life, our financial situation. Eric encouraging her to leave me, promising her a better life with him. The 2 of them planning a future together that didn't include the inconvenient husband who was currently paying for their romantic dinners. The most recent exchange was from that morning. Sarah: "I can't keep doing this much longer. The guilt is killing me, and I'm tired of pretending to be happy at home." Eric: "Just a little longer, sweetheart. I'm getting that promotion next month, and then we can make this official. You file for divorce, move in with me, and we start the life we should have had all along." Sarah: "What about Danny? I don't want to destroy him." Eric: "He'll be fine. Guys like that always land on their feet. Besides, you can't sacrifice your happiness for his comfort forever." I stared at the screen until the words blurred together, my chest tight with a combination of rage and heartbreak that threatened to overwhelm me. They were talking about ending my marriage like it was a minor inconvenience, something to be disposed of as quickly and cleanly as possible. Well, if Sarah wanted a divorce, she was going to get one. But it wasn't going to be quick, and it sure as hell wasn't going to be clean. I forwarded the most damaging emails to my personal account, then cleared the browser history and closed the laptop. By the time Sarah emerged from the bathroom, toweling her hair dry, I was sitting on the couch watching television as if nothing had happened. "What are you watching?" she asked, settling beside me in her bathrobe. "Just the news," I replied, not trusting myself to say more. She curled up against my side, warm and soft and smelling like her expensive shampoo. "I love quiet nights like this," she murmured. "Just the 2 of us." I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, playing the role of devoted husband one more time. But inside, I was already planning my next move. If Sarah and Eric wanted to play games, I was going to show them what a real game looked like. The opportunity came sooner than I'd expected. On Friday afternoon, Sarah announced that she'd be working late again, something about a last-minute client emergency that couldn't wait until Monday. "Don't wait up for me," she said, kissing my cheek as she gathered her purse and laptop bag. "This could take hours." I waited until her car disappeared around the corner, then grabbed my keys and headed for Eric's condo. I'd looked up his address online. He lived in one of those trendy downtown developments that catered to young professionals with more money than sense. The building's parking garage was secured, but I found a spot on the street with a clear view of the entrance. Sure enough, Sarah's car was parked in a visitor's space near the elevator. For a moment, I just sat there, staring up at the building and trying to decide what to do next. The smart thing would be to drive home, call a lawyer, and start divorce proceedings based on the evidence I'd already gathered. Clean, simple, civilized. But I was past civilized. I was past smart. I wanted to look my wife and her lover in the eye and let them know that their little secret wasn't so secret anymore. The building's lobby was all marble and glass, designed to impress visitors with its expensive emptiness. The security guard barely looked up from his newspaper as I walked to the elevator bank and pressed the button for the 15th floor. Eric's condo was at the end of a long hallway lined with identical doors. I could hear music coming from inside, something soft and jazzy that probably cost more per song than I spent on lunch. I knocked. The music stopped, followed by the sound of hurried whispers and footsteps. After a long moment, the door opened to reveal Eric Castellanos in all his perfectly groomed glory. He was wearing an expensive-looking silk shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, and his hair was slightly mussed. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. But I could see the recognition in his eyes, followed quickly by something that might have been fear. "I think we need to talk," I said, pushing past him into the condo before he could object. The place was exactly what I'd expected. All modern furniture and abstract art, the kind of space that looked like it belonged in a magazine rather than real life. Sarah was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city, a glass of wine in her hand and guilt written all over her face. She'd changed out of her work clothes into a black dress I'd never seen before. Her makeup was perfect, her hair styled in loose waves that caught the light from the expensive fixtures overhead. She looked beautiful and sophisticated and completely foreign to me. "Danny," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same question," I replied, looking back and forth between them. "But I think I already know the answer." Eric stepped forward, trying to position himself between Sarah and me. "Look, Mr. Morrison, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," I interrupted, "is thinking I'm stupid enough to believe your lies." I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the photos I'd taken of the credit card receipts, the emails, the jewelry, Romano's restaurant last Thursday, Victoria's Secret, 3 different purchases over the past month, the Riverside Inn 3 weeks ago when my wife was supposedly at a conference in Chicago. Sarah's face went pale. "Danny, please, let me explain." "Explain what? How you've been screwing around behind my back for the past 6 months? How you've been using our money to finance your little affair? How you and Loverboy here have been planning to dump me like yesterday's garbage?" Eric's jaw tightened. "You need to calm down, man. Getting angry isn't going to solve anything." "Don't tell me to calm down," I snapped, taking a step closer to him. "And don't call me man, like we're buddies. You've been sleeping with my wife and spending my money. That makes you a thief and a homewrecker, not my friend." "It's not like that," Sarah said, finally finding her voice. "Danny, our marriage has been over for years. We both know that. We're just going through the motions." "Our marriage was over? Funny, nobody told me. I thought we were just going through a rough patch. I thought we were still a team." "When was the last time we really talked?" Sarah demanded, some of her old fire returning. "When was the last time we did anything together besides watch TV and go to bed? You're so wrapped up in your work, your truck, your stupid boxing gym that you barely notice I exist." "I notice you exist." "I've been trying to connect with you for months, but you've been too busy screwing Eric to pay attention." Eric stepped forward again, his face flushed with anger. "Hey, don't talk to her like that." I turned on him, months of rage and humiliation boiling over. "You don't get to defend her. You don't get to play the white knight after you've been sneaking around with another man's wife." Before I knew what was happening, Eric's hand was on my chest, pushing me backward. It wasn't a hard shove, more of a warning than an attack, but it was enough to snap the last thread of my self-control. I grabbed his wrist and twisted, using leverage I'd learned in Jules's gym to spin him around and slam him face first against the wall. His expensive artwork rattled from the impact, and Sarah screamed, "Danny, stop! You're hurting him." I pressed my forearm against the back of Eric's neck, holding him in place while I leaned close to his ear. "Listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice deadly quiet. "You're going to stay away from my wife. You're going to stop calling her, stop texting her, stop taking her to expensive restaurants on my dime. Because if I find out you've contacted her again, we're going to have another conversation, and next time, it won't be so friendly." "You're crazy," Eric gasped, struggling against my hold. "I'll call the police." "Go ahead," I said, pressing harder. "Tell them how you've been having an affair with a married woman. Tell them about the credit card fraud, the stolen jewelry, All the evidence I've got documenting your little romance. See how that works out for you." I released him and stepped back, my heart pounding with adrenaline. Eric straightened his shirt and turned to face me, his perfectly styled hair disheveled and his face red with embarrassment. "This isn't over," he said, trying to salvage some dignity. "You're right," I agreed. "It's not." "Sarah, get your things. We're leaving." "I'm not going anywhere with you," she said, lifting her chin defiantly. "Not after this. You can't just barge in here and start throwing people around like some kind of caveman. I can when my wife is cheating on me with a coward who hides behind expensive suits and pretty words." I looked at Eric with disgust. "Some creative genius you are. Couldn't even come up with an original way to steal another man's wife." Sarah moved to Eric's side, taking his arm in a gesture of solidarity that felt like another slap in the face. "Danny, I want a divorce. I should have asked for one months ago, but I was trying to spare your feelings. Clearly, that was a mistake." "Clearly," I agreed. "But don't worry about sparing my feelings anymore, Sarah. I'm done pretending this marriage means something to you. I'm done pretending you're the woman I married." I headed for the door, then stopped and looked back at them. They were standing close together, Eric's arm around Sarah's shoulders in a protective gesture that would have been touching if it wasn't built on lies and betrayal. "By the way," I said, "you might want to be more careful about leaving your laptop open. Some of those emails you two have been sending back and forth are pretty interesting reading. Especially the parts where you talk about what a loser I am." Sarah's face went white. "You read my private messages? Private messages sent from my house, using internet service I pay for, planning activities funded by my credit cards. Yeah, I read them. And so will my lawyer, and probably a judge, when we get to the part about dividing up our assets." I left them standing there in stunned silence and took the elevator down to the lobby. My hands were shaking as I walked to my truck, the adrenaline from the confrontation making me feel simultaneously energized and nauseated. I'd done it. I'd finally stopped pretending everything was okay and faced the truth head on. But as I drove home through the darkening streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just made everything much, much worse. The house felt different when I walked through the front door. Emptier somehow, as if the confrontation at Eric's condo had stripped away the last pretense of normalcy from my life. I poured myself a beer and sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone and waiting for Sarah to call. She'd have to come home eventually. All her clothes were here, her makeup, the life we'd built together over 15 years. But as the hours ticked by and the beer turned warm in my hand, I began to realize that maybe she wouldn't come home. Maybe the woman who'd stood by Eric's side, defending him against her own husband, was already gone for good. The thought should have made me sad. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Relief. For the first time in a long time, I knew exactly where I stood, and I was ready for whatever came next. Sarah didn't come home that night, or the next night. By Sunday evening, it was clear that she'd made her choice, and it wasn't me. She did, however, send a text message on Monday morning. "I'm staying at my sister's for a while. We need to talk about how to handle this situation like adults, like adults." As if I was the one who'd been acting childishly by objecting to her affair. I showed the message to Jules when I stopped by the gym after work. He read it twice, then shook his head with disgust. "She's got some nerve, I'll give her that." Cheats on you for 6 months, then lectures you about being an adult when you call her on it. "What do you think I should do?" I asked, wrapping my hands for a session with the heavy bag. "Legally? Get a lawyer, file for divorce, try to protect as many of your assets as possible. She's probably doing the same thing, so you don't want to get caught flat-footed." "And unofficially?" Jules grinned, but there was no humor in it. "Unofficially, I'd say she deserves whatever she gets. But be smart about it, Danny. Don't do anything that could come back to bite you in court." I spent the next few days thinking about that advice while I went through the motions of normal life. Work, home, sleep, repeat. The house felt like a museum now, full of artifacts from a marriage that no longer existed. On Thursday, I made a decision that would have shocked the old Danny Morrison, the guy who fixed things instead of breaking them, who tried to see the best in people even when they didn't deserve it. I was going to give Sarah and Eric exactly what they'd given me, a nasty surprise they'd never see coming. The first part of my plan was simple. I drove to Eric's office building during lunch and waited in the parking garage until I spotted his silver BMW. Then I did something I'd never imagined myself capable of. I let the air out of all 4 tires and poured a bottle of corn syrup into his gas tank. It wasn't permanent damage. The tires could be reinflated and the gas tank cleaned out, but it would cost him time, money, and a significant amount of embarrassment when he tried to leave work that evening. The second part required more finesse. I'd been thinking about those emails Sarah and Eric had exchanged, particularly the ones where they'd made fun of my job and my lack of ambition. They thought I was just a simple-minded grease monkey who didn't understand their sophisticated world. Time to show them how wrong they were. I'd done some research on Brennan and Associates and discovered that the company had a strict policy against workplace relationships, especially between employees and their direct supervisors. Eric was a senior account executive. Sarah was a junior associate on his team. Their affair wasn't just morally questionable, it was a fireable offense. I spent my lunch break crafting an anonymous email to the company's HR department. Nothing threatening or explicitly accusatory, just a concerned inquiry about whether the company was aware of the inappropriate relationship between 2 of its employees. I attached a few of the more incriminating emails Sarah and Eric had exchanged, the ones where they discussed meeting at work and using company resources to plan their personal activities. The email was sent from a fake account I'd created at the public library, using one of their computers so it couldn't be traced back to me. Clean, professional, and completely devastating. By Friday afternoon, the results were starting to show. Sarah called me for the first time since our confrontation, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Danny, we need to talk, right now." "I'm listening." "Not over the phone. Meet me at Rosie's Diner in an hour." Rosie's was a neutral location, the kind of place where Sarah wouldn't want to make a scene in front of the other customers. I agreed to meet her there, curious to see how she planned to handle whatever crisis had prompted this sudden desire for communication. She was already waiting in a corner booth when I arrived, her face pale and her hands wrapped around a coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping her anchored to reality. "You bastard," she said as soon as I sat down. "You vindictive, petty bastard. Good to see you too, honey. How's the new living arrangement working out? Don't play dumb with me. I know it was you who sent those emails to HR." I signaled the waitress for coffee, taking my time before responding. "I have no idea what you're talking about. Eric's been suspended pending an investigation. They're talking about firing him, Danny. His career could be ruined." "That's terrible," I said, not bothering to hide my lack of sympathy. Maybe he should have thought about that before he started sleeping with a married coworker. Sarah's eyes flashed with anger. "You're destroying innocent people out of spite." "Innocent people?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Sarah, you've been cheating on me for 6 months. You've been using our money to finance your affair. You and your innocent boyfriend have been planning to dump me like garbage while making jokes about what a loser I am. And now you want to lecture me about spite? That's different. We never meant for you to get hurt. You never meant for me to find out. There's a difference." The waitress brought my coffee, and I took a sip while Sarah stared at me with something that might have been recognition. Maybe she was finally seeing past the easygoing husband she'd taken for granted for so many years. "What do you want?" she asked finally. "I want a divorce, a fair divorce, where we split our assets 50-50 and go our separate ways without any alimony or ongoing financial obligations. And if I agree to that, then I'll stop making your life difficult." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing, the implications of my offer. You'd leave Eric alone? I don't care about Eric. He's your problem now. But if you try to take me to the cleaners in the divorce, if you try to claim I was abusive or unreasonable, then all bets are off. I've got enough evidence of your affair to make things very unpleasant for both of you. You're blackmailing me. I'm negotiating. There's a difference. She finished her coffee and stood up, her movements sharp with suppressed fury. Fine. I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers. But Danny, this isn't over between us. Yes, it is, I said calmly. It's been over for months. You're just finally admitting it. She left without another word, her heels clicking angrily across the diner's linoleum floor. I sat there for a while longer, drinking my coffee and watching the traffic pass by outside. For the first time since I'd discovered Sarah's affair, I felt like I was back in control of my own life. It wasn't a happy feeling exactly, but it was better than the helpless rage that had been eating me alive for weeks. The divorce papers arrived the following Monday, just as Sarah had promised. The terms were exactly what we'd discussed, a clean 50-50 split with no alimony and no ongoing obligations. I signed them that same day and had them delivered back to her lawyer. 2 weeks later, it was official. 15 years of marriage dissolved with the stroke of a judge's pen and the payment of a modest filing fee. I heard through the grapevine that Eric had been fired from Brennan and Associates, ostensibly for violating the company's ethics policy, but really because his affair had become an open secret that was bad for business. Sarah managed to keep her job, but her career prospects at the agency were essentially finished. They moved in together shortly after my divorce was finalized, renting a small apartment across town that was a far cry from Eric's former luxury condo. Apparently, unemployment and scandal didn't pay as well as he'd expected. I sold the house and bought a smaller place closer to the shop, using my half of the proceeds to pay off my truck and set up a nice workshop in the garage. Emma called occasionally, usually when she needed money or wanted to complain about her mother's new living situation. Mom says you ruined Eric's career out of jealousy, she told me during one of these conversations. Your mother's entitled to her opinion, I replied, but Eric ruined his own career when he decided to sleep with a married co-worker. I just made sure the right people found out about it. That's pretty cold, Dad. Sometimes the world is a cold place, sweetheart. Sometimes people get exactly what they deserve, whether they like it or not. 6 months after the divorce, I ran into Sarah at the grocery store. She looked older, tired, and she was wearing clothes from Target instead of the designer outfits she used to favor. Eric was with her, pushing the cart and looking like a man who'd learned that real life was a lot less romantic than stolen afternoons in luxury condos. They saw me at the same time I saw them. For a moment, we all just stood there in the cereal aisle, 3 people whose lives had been permanently altered by choices and consequences. Danny, Sarah said finally, her voice carefully neutral. Sarah, Eric. I nodded to both of them, then continued shopping as if the encounter meant nothing to me. Because it didn't. They were strangers now, people from my past who'd chosen their own path and would have to live with the results. I had my own path to worry about. That evening, I called Jules and asked if he wanted to grab a beer and watch the game. We ended up at Murphy's Tavern, a working-class bar where nobody cared about your relationship status or your career prospects, where a man could drink in peace and not worry about impressing anyone. You seem different, Jules observed as we watched the 4th quarter of a game neither of us really cared about. Different how? Happier. More relaxed. Like you're finally comfortable in your own skin. I thought about that for a moment, rolling the cold beer bottle between my palms. Maybe I am. For the first time in years, I know exactly who I am and what I want. No pretending, no trying to be someone else to make other people happy. And what do you want? Simple things. Good work, good friends, a truck that runs, and a house that's paid for. Maybe someday I'll find someone who appreciates those things too, but if I don't, that's okay. I'd rather be alone than be with someone who thinks I'm not good enough. Jules raised his beer in a mock toast. To simple things and honest friends. To getting exactly what you deserve, I countered. We clinked bottles and drank, two middle-aged men who'd learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to let other people's choices define your worth. Outside, the city lights twinkled in the darkness, full of promise and possibility. For the first time in months, I was looking forward to tomorrow.